Welcome to the NewSpace India podcast, a bi-weekly talk show that exclusively captures insightful conversations with people contributing to advancement of space activities in India. The NewSpace India podcast is pleased to announce our association with Dassault Systems, a global leader in providing business and people with collaborative virtual environments to imagine sustainable innovations. Dassault Systems solutions support startups, small and medium-sized enterprises, and original equipment manufacturers in developing disruptive solutions for space launches and satellite propulsion. Recently, a supply chain digitization study with Dassault Systems was conducted to provide a foundational understanding of the supplier landscape in the Indian space ecosystem. Please use the link in the description to download the public white paper of the results of this study, which will also give you a perspective on how ready Indian suppliers are to enter the global space market. All right. Again, we're live and welcome to yet another episode of the NewSpace India podcast. And we have with us Abhi here. I've known Abhi for some time now with the intersection of startups and accelerators and investing and so on. So welcome, Abhi, to the show.
Thank you, Narayan. Thank you. It's a pleasure being here. I've been meaning to get on this podcast of yours for a long time, and I'm so glad we can finally do this.
Great. Yeah, thanks for making the time. And firstly, I know that you are from the investment community and, you've done a lot of work in the investment community. What attracts you to the space industry and, especially trying to help people in India, get going with their space ventures?
But that is such an amazing question. I'm so glad you asked me that. Honestly, that's rarely been asked of me in the last few months since I launched Starburst. I'll come back at that in this kind of context, right? So as you know, I've been part of the venture community, the investment landscape for a while now, based out of the U.S. And space had become quite interesting over the last 2 or 3 years, and it just so happened that I got to meet and I got to know the Starburst team closely because of everything else that I was doing as a generalist investor. So it kind of is interesting that you have folks like me who have also become very you know focused on what is happening in space. And what I like about space, and when I was doing my research, kind of and building my thesis about how I would approach space tech in general, I found it on two accounts very, very interesting and very consuming at the same time. One was space is this ecosystem which truly just takes away any boundaries that you've sort of you operate with in the normal context, right? In the normal construct. So, as somebody that believes in democratization, someone that believes in the power of collaboration, especially across borders, and believes in the in innovators, it just seemed like a no-brainer at one end. Second, deep tech is something that has been at the forefront of changing various industries at various points in time, and I thought it was just about the right time, both in the more advanced space tech ecosystems across the world, and then of course markets like India, where the situations just warranted that you would, if you're in a position of power, or even as an enabler, if you have some position to kind of make a difference, this would be the time. So those are the two kind of factors for me that resonated very well, and I thought this was the time to do something interesting, somewhere where I could perhaps make a contribution and give the ecosystem what I could from my end, in terms of a nudge, a little bit of push, and hopefully at the end of it all make a little dent in the ecosystem. So that's kind of what I was thinking about. With respect to India, of course, you all within the community have been aware of what is happening in India over the years, right? So the in-space program, the new policies, the privatization of the entire effort, I guess, around space tech opportunities, that just started to happen in the last few years. So honestly, since 2017, this had been a shot in my mind, to really come in and do something as a space tech investor slash entrepreneur. But I was just trying to find the right channels. And then I found this really interesting piece of information, which was that there were some things happening in India from the student community, the research community, and of course the broader sort of corporate innovation ecosystem within space tech. And while the efforts were certainly all around the place. I think the fragmentation was there. There were a few gaps in between the way the industry was collaborating. And then in the meantime, I happened to sort of come closer to a platform like Starburst, which has done phenomenal work globally, right? And they're on this really amazing path to kind of disrupt the way innovation is done in the space ecosystem. So I just wanted to be part of something like that, and I kind of then put two and two together and figured out this was the right kind of an opportunity to bring a platform like Starburst, which connects the Indian space ecosystem to the sort of broader global ecosystem and allow stakeholders on each side to interact more freely, sort of in a more nimble way, have free exchange of ideas. And the beauty of it all is, I'm a big believer in sort of creating funnels and opportunities for educational exchanges. And the one thing about entrepreneurship and venture building that a lot of people don't talk about is that it's largely an educational experience that you have to go through to be able to really discover opportunities that are meaningful. And then, of course, then you deploy all your skills and your resources towards it to make something happen. So that's kind of where I think I was kind of cued into, and what I was cued into, and what I wanted to launch, and that's what brought me to India.
Yeah, I mean, fascinating. And I think, we kind of desperately need people like you who are in that community, who can support the scaling up of the whole thing. I mean, one of the things that I was actually, thinking about is that we actually don't have any, space specific accelerator programs or even support programs or even, getting corporates or even normal VC, companies or VC firms invest in space companies. That's in itself a challenge, right? Only now we have some, VCs firming up their thesis around, why they want to invest in space, or some of the corporates looking at, okay, can we take a cut of one of these companies and invest and try to diversify into the industry. So from kind of your perspective, what do you think is the core aspects of the things that you want to address, and then how do you see you tackling all of these problems?
Well, yeah, that's a good question and a loaded question. So, so there are two things, right? So you're spot on in saying that. Look, space in general is difficult because it includes so many different things, from suppliers to manufacturers to to researchers and agencies. I think these interactions are manifold, and you have to kind of go through layers of discoveries before you're able to kind of come in and action off on something, right? So one thing that I believe is that space tech in general has received a decent amount of attention from the VC community over the last 5 to 6 years, to say the least. And if you just think about what's happening in the US, for example, one of the more advanced ecosystems, I would say that there is enough appetite on part of the VCs to invest in space deals, and that is happening. You see different launch companies and various satcom companies, for example. Many things have happened over the years. Now in India, we're at a pretty nascent stage, so I think the evolution is taking place, and you have a few that are really coming on board and investing in sort of bold bets. They're backing founders that are bold, and their aspirations are pretty high. They're a very ambitious bunch. Pixel is a good example. Agnico, Skyroot, all these names that you hear of from the Indian ecosystem, Bellatrix. And there are many examples now. But of course, there's a lot that needs to be done. So the way I see it is that it's a double-edged sword, right? If you have private capital, or you have investors ready to invest in an ecosystem, that alone doesn't do the trick. You have to have enough churn. You have to have enough activity that's going to become interesting for people to understand where the industry at large is headed, what is the trajectory of these companies, and so forth, right? So for a meaningful tech ecosystem like we see in other ecosystems, right? Like e-commerce or fintech ecosystem, whatever has happened over the years in India, for example, has been super interesting. And I think my feeling has been, and of course, backed by everything that I've seen here on ground, and I feel validated in that approach, is that we're kind of on the brink of something here. And that means that we have to do two things. One is we need to continue to encourage more entrepreneurs to take bolder initiatives, right? They need to think about, can I do a propulsion tech company? Can I look at the entire value chain of the space ecosystem and figure out where I can play a part, and really not just think of it from a very myopic standpoint that, hey, I'm just gonna care to XYZ type of companies. in India, but they have to really think global. As I said, space kind of inherently it just allows you to think in a very sort of um, open manner where you're not really looking at boundaries because space is for all humanity, right? I mean that's the attach, right? So I think that's kind of what we need to think about when we think about what kind of companies should be coming out of a massive talent pool driven country like India. So I think that's kind of one thing that we're also focused on, which is encouraging innovation and entrepreneurship in the ecosystem. And for us, it starts with really kind of trying to weave together what's happening at the research and the university incubators, try to bring them into the fold and share with them our insights, learn from them along with them, and then also work with the corporates on one hand, which we do already. The agencies define a lot of their problem statements anyway, so we get to learn a lot. We get to identify a lot of opportunities and important aspects of venture building alongside these various participants. And I think that's kind of giving us a tool set, if you will, right, in a very program-driven format to identify what needs to be done to take the take various programs or innovations at a different to a different level. So I think it's all incremental in that sense. We need to keep finding a bigger problem to solve, a more bold, bet on things that could not have been conceived 3 or 4 years ago, right? So I think that's kind of one thing. The other is in terms of the alignment with investor interest. That is another challenge. I hear a lot about IP and and the interest that needs to be aligned from perspective of the founders, the agencies if they're concerned with an IP kind of being owned by foreign investors and so forth. So I think there's a lot of conversation there that needs to be put together. There are ways of solving these problems, and I've been on a couple of panels where we addressed these issues extensively. But again, a lot of this is, as you know, dependent on internal policy making. So policy making is a huge area of interest for us as well. We try to serve as much as we can based on the insights we can gather and share that with other policymakers who are in a position of power again to kind of make sure that progress is not hindered in any way for these companies that are really trying to go out there and solve big problems.
What do you think is the core set of gaps that you see that, let's say, you at Starburst India want to, bridge?
As I said, so two things. I think we need to massively increase or rather rapidly increase the kind of companies that are coming out of India and kind of go after more complex problem sets. So we found quite a decent number, and we think we need to scale it up to at least 30, 40 companies a year, if not more. So just purely if you think of me, what would be my target? My intent is to really find folks that are trying to go after problem sets that only they know they can solve better than the rest of the boys in the room, and we're trying to help them sort of get to that level where they receive the right kind of attention from the investors and you can get ready for, let's say, a pre-Series A or a Series A, right? In terms of the gaps that I think are important to go after, one would be, we need to define a little bit better what our policy is going to be around interaction with foreign investors. FDI, the PLI is a great incentive right now. It needs to be sent out in a sort of a clear message and maybe promoted a little bit more actively. I don't know what the feeling is at your end, but I think that messaging needs to go out a little bit more clearly to the broader community at large. So that's something that we're trying to get behind as well. The second thing that we think is important for us is for folks that are really part of the corporate innovation framework to look at newer markets like India and realize that there are other peers that they have that are already looking at India, and it's not a cost advantage alone anymore. Now people are looking at India for innovation sourcing, right? So that's the other one. A problem that I think most Indian companies are right now in the ecosystem facing are that they're still, to some extent, dependent on external suppliers and sources or foreign suppliers and sources, which is great actually, if you ask me, because you get to kind of build with parts and supplies that are world class. But I think there is that conversation where you have an opportunity to do handshakes and bring them to different ecosystems. Bring a participant to, say, an ecosystem like India and find an opportunity for them to do business here in a more nimble, more sort of seamless manner. So I think that's something that we're trying to enable. There are local sort of vendors and suppliers in the ecosystem who want to go after such programs and transitions, if you will. Interestingly enough, I think we've seen a lot of attention from there, right? So there are these older companies that have been around 10, 12 years, and they've come to us asking us about how should they make a transition from being a pure play supplier in one category and then transform themselves into a more innovative company catering to a new launch company or a new satellite maker and so forth. So I think that's kind of what's happening, and that is a big motivator for me. This is something that I thought was happening, but I wasn't really sure. But over the last few months, I've discovered that that is indeed the case, which is really heartwarming at one point, where you feel confident that your assumptions are holding true now. So it's really a good place to be in right now. There's a lot of transformation happening. There's a lot of appetite for transformations.
Absolutely. And one of the gaps that I see that is existing, you really, laid out very well the ideas for helping young companies or younger entrepreneurs or so on to kick off in that sense. But there's the other side of the spectrum, which is, more and more of these mature companies who have actually raised, let's say, their Series A or so on. And the the problem that I see that still exists is capital sources for anybody who wants to raise like a Series B or a Series C in India, right? Because you're talking about raising anywhere between 50, 100 million plus, right? So, and that too as a space company, that is still quite a big challenge as such. And, that can be solved by either, one of these international VC firms like whatever, Tiger or somebody like that saying, we will invest in Indian space companies, or it could be solved by, one of these corporate houses like Tata or, Adani or whatever, Reliance, saying we're going to be interested in investing in these companies because we kind of see an opportunity here, right? So, is this reading correct? And if yes, how do you think we should be evangelizing this community?
That's also a good question. So there's two things that have happened in the past, and I've had this conversation with, say, a group of VCs, and I've had this conversation with other entrepreneurs as well. And the question around growth capital is interesting because now that time will come, right? That time will come. I think when you think about it from your perspective and my perspective, we're obviously bullish on this. So we would want for private sources of capital and larger sources of capital to be ready now versus 3 years from now, right? But it takes time for them to bite into these kinds of opportunities, right? Let's not forget it. It took a long time in the U.S. for the private ecosystem to become what it is today. In India, we're still way ahead of the game if you think about where we were and where we could have gone, right, over the years. Yes, sure, there's some lost opportunities there, but I truly feel that that time will come for growth capital and for later stage investing, at a Series B, Series C level. But I think it's also about, for these very names that you mentioned, it's also about mitigating as much risk as they can when they get involved in something as ambitious as space. However, if you look at broadly the airspace and defense ecosystem, they've already started to take different kinds of opportunities on. So I believe, and I have certainly the hope that, be it Adani, be it Tata's, be it Mahindra's, from the domestic lot, I think they're definitely kind of putting all these companies on their radar. Some of them may have gotten involved through their family offices or directly within checks, and they're waiting for the next milestone to be hit. So I think it's a little bit of a wait and watch period with them, based on some interactions, conversations I've had. Again, both in the investor community and then otherwise with the entrepreneurs. I think that's kind of what they're waiting to see. And let's say if we do find that it is the right time for a company to go to a Tiger or some of the larger sort of global funds, I don't think they're going to shy away. They're not going to shy away. I think it's about, again, to your point, how do we evangelize this? I think the messaging has to be really loud and clear, and it needs to be backed by friendly policies, right? Which is what's happening now. So I truly believe that we'll find the right kind of sources of capital when it is the right time, but it has to be lucrative enough for these folks, and they have to see it from an India context, not a global context. Again, because of the unit economics involved and so forth. So they need to allow. I think one thing that I keep talking to people about is, especially whenever I have an opportunity to talk to investors, I say, you have to be ready with patient capital, because this is not a quick turnaround situation, especially in space. When you think about payoffs, the typical time to return is longer. right? So you need to be patient with your capital forms. So that's one thing that a lot of the sort of more mature space investors do understand. That maturity has to come to the rest of the investors from a mindset standpoint, right? So once they build comfortability with that kind of an approach and they understand what is the true value of the opportunities in the market and the addressable market and all that is great. But what is their payoff going to look like, right, in 7, 10 years? Once they have a deeper, better understanding of it, then they're more likely to invest, right? Even 15 years. So they need to look at a 10, 15, 20-year trajectory, and that's kind of what we're also trying to do, right? So I think it's a little bit about giving people the right kind of insights, the right kind of information, and I think that needs to be done a little bit more actively, and that's something that we kind of I can shamelessly plug in Starburst here because that's one thing that we're going after too.
Yeah, I mean, definitely one of the key points that I see as such, right? So there's one other part of the thesis which is also interesting from an investing kind of a point of view, which is when you look at private companies and especially space companies that are coming up in India, right? So we can all agree that they have a certain, core advantage space, which is lower cost of manpower and infrastructure that is already available that they can kind of leverage, the supplier network that they can use locally to keep everything a little bit low cost, and talent being available, yeah, right, talent being available, and there's a few advantages that we can all agree to, that there's no disagreement with anybody on those fronts, right? So, but what is interesting to note is who in the market are these guys addressing? Will they be saying that, the local market in India is going to be big enough for us to say that we're going to be occupying this local market here, and then we're going to be, addressing India as a market for us, and this market is big enough for us to be a big company and get an exit? Or you think that most of these companies will have to, depend on competing in the international markets and saying we'll take all of the advantage that we can get locally to then say we're going to be challenging people internationally and then building products to the global market and then selling and competing globally, right? So what is your perspective on this?
So my perspective is that before you start competing, you have to become capable of integrating and being able to deliver as an integrated partner to somebody that is already doing massive things at a global scale. So that is the stage where most of these companies should be thinking about. That is what they should be thinking about. This is not about one-upmanship, right? This is about how do I become an enabler first and allow people to build comfortability with my company that I'm gonna send out satellites, I'm gonna take payloads, and I'm the responsible party here from India, and they should rely on me for a set number of objectives. I think that's kind of what they should be focused on right now. If you think about beating out competition right now, you're probably on the. I wouldn't say it's wrong to think about that. I would just think your ambition and your objectives need to be aligned a little bit, right? So I think that's kind of what needs to be perhaps taken into consideration at this point. The second is in terms of the market. I truly believe that there is this very interesting thing happening within continents, right? So there are different regions really now in a race to go to space, right? So I think in Southeast Asia and South Asia particularly, I think India has again, it has all the makings for other regional sort of interests to come to these companies that are set up in India and take advantage of what is happening here. So I think if you think about, hey, would a company in the US really use their services or really sign up with an Indian company as a customer? I think they will, right? It really depends on their needs, their requirements, and eventually, we've seen that there are Indian companies that are doing contracts with companies in the US. They're having agreements for launch pads or different forms of agreements are being formed. Say, a Momentous signing a contract with another company in India that's going to be part of their next phase. So I mean, there are things happening there. So it's not like they're not finding opportunities to integrate or kind of create a play for themselves or a playbook rather, which allows them to experiment a little bit more with their global counterparts. And I think that's where the head should be at. It's more about evolving with the breed, so to say, right now, than just going out there and saying, "Hey, we're the next best Indian startup, and we're we're here to beat out the competition. I think don't get me wrong, I'm all about for being brash, but I think right now is the time when you walk, you experiment, you learn, you grow, you define what is your best strength, and then go out there and then talk about competition. But I think if you think about just the natural way the landscape is, in South Asia, Southeast Asia is where India's biggest market is, and I think domestically in India also there is appetite, but I think it's not there yet. I mean, it's not completely optimal, right? So the levels of appetite, if you were to judge, I think the domestic ecosystem in India is still, there are some needs that we can meet, right? From the perspective of, okay, what industry are we going to serve? Be it agri-tech, be it the agency level surveillances or space situational awareness and so forth. So I think there are different factions of these industry verticals that we're going after, but I think that still needs to evolve. It's certainly not as mature as in terms of its outlook. It's not as mature as the more advanced players in the ecosystem, and we all know that, and that's okay because it's going to take time for this to be pushed out as a message, and then as we continue to discover more needs, we will continue to build up enough capabilities around them. So if you think about their readiness levels, they're at the right, in my mind, they're at the right place at the right time, and they need to continue to evolve. Most of these companies.
Definitely something that is going to be interesting from your perspective again. Do you see that this whole software ecosystem that we've built helps us take software based talent and then infrastructure and everything else to build geospatial kind of companies that easily scale or so on. So
Already happening. Already happening.
the question is, where do you see more and more opportunities available? As in, for example, because there's the kind of companies like Astrogate or Bellatrix, or those are very hardware driven companies, right? You really have to build that hardware up and then build everything up to be able to go to the market. And then there's very little of MVP kind of thing that you can do that software companies can do with that, right? So the risk is kind of higher with all of that.
But that's exactly where the opportunity is now, right? If that's what your question is, I would just jump in to say, and I won't even let you finish your question on that, but I think that's exactly where the opportunity is. Go after bigger, bolder bets, as I said. Go after hardware. And I think that's where it is, right? Yes, software defined projects are really cool, and I think we have enough talent that's going after that piece of the business. So you think about analytics, spatial situational awareness, guys at Pixel and everybody else that is doing some really cool stuff. So I think we've got that piece of the business model covered. What we really need to think about is advanced manufacturing, right? 3D printing's coming around. There's stuff happening there, composites and materials, right? These are the things that we need to continue to think about. If you really ask me, uh, yeah, I mean, I think the more hardware driven you are in your approach right now, I think that is kind of what we should be thinking about, what we should be going after, because that really enables the rest of the ecosystem in a very different way and different light. It just shows that we're ready to kind of mature at that level and kind of really think about near sourcing, and those are the significant cost advantages that people will recognize across borders, right? And I think that helps us collectively in various ways. When we're thinking about pushing this whole space tech ecosystem towards a new milestone or the next best milestone.
So, in all of this, what do you think is the role of ISRO, and how can they support you, and what do you expect out of him?
Oh wow, that's a good question. Maybe we should have this for the call here. So look, with the space agencies, it's always a little bit of a give and take. In a phase where they're also trying to figure out how best to enable private entrepreneurs and private companies. Our job really as a platform that is as much an educational platform as it is as it is a commercially driven transactional platform is that we deliver insights, we deliver research, we deliver our findings back to policymakers, companies, and founders so that they can kind of get to their next milestone. And for us, it's really about really being the connector, right? So we're innovation catalysts, and that's something that we truly believe in, right? That's the motto, and that's kind of what we really get behind. So for us, participation with ISRO would mean helping understand, or first of all, us understanding what are their needs, right, from their space program standpoint, right? What can we enable them? for what kind of programs and policies should we be developing internally for the corporate participants, right? How do we get people to think about remote sensing, think about navigations, think about satellites and geospatial analytics, sorry, and various other forms of programs that they're getting after. So I think it's about connecting the dots, really mapping what ISRO's needs are to what is happening broadly in the space ecosystem and generally, in the innovation ecosystem broadly that's enabling space tech opportunities. So I think that's kind of what we're doing. Uh, it's easy to get problem sets. It's harder to map them when we're doing the process. When we're already in the process of discovery, right? So the process of discovery is pretty detailed for us at our end because we see quite a volume. So I think it's a little bit of a daunting task, but we're up for it. That's what we've picked up the challenge for, and sourcing is one thing, but really mapping capabilities to what the need of the hour is, that's a whole different beast by itself, right? Because there's a lot of validation, a lot of activity behind the scenes that goes on. So I think that's kind of what we're really focused on. Designing innovation programs is another thing. So if they ever were going to think about, hey, how do we develop a national level agenda and think about upgrading our infrastructures, think about what kind of testing labs we need for these new breed of companies, what kind of facilities we need, what use cases should we go out and think about that we haven't perhaps thought about. I think those are things that we can come in on and support them with.
I get a lot of kind of phone calls or messages from kind of young people trying to say we're going to be starting space companies or we are in the process of validating a market or whatever, right? So sometimes I do keep getting these messages on a kind of a weekly basis at the end. So how does Starburst India and whatever program that you're kind of putting together, how will it kind of work from their perspective, and how do they approach you, or how will the whole thing work, moving forward?
So I think we've done successfully something with UCLA that's going on where we think about taking students at universities and companies that are being founded at universities and helping them get to the next milestone again using our platform as a medium to discover opportunities, meet with participants broadly in the ecosystem, making star hires and so forth. So if startups and students in India are actually looking to participate, I think we will soon be working on a program. We're actually developing it right now. I'm actually focused on rolling something out, but it's too early to talk about it. However, we have already created opportunities for students to freely interact with the platform. Come attend our events. I would say definitely come attend our events. A lot of our events are invite only, but certainly we do panels and various other things, and we will be kind of doing once hopefully things open up physical meetups in our facilities in Mumbai and Bangalore and Chennai, Delhi, name it. We're going to be all over the country. We're hopefully bringing a lot of corporates, universities, student communities together that are interested in innovation in aerospace, and that's one way of getting involved. I think it's more about getting involved with the right kind of people that are that are really building great companies that are solving big problems. And I think it's important to identify what the gaps are, right? So if you're a student today, and if your audience, anybody in your audience is kind of listening to this podcast, look, the most important thing that they can do right now is instead of being ambitious about, hey, I'm going to build another Pixel, I think what you should do is maybe understand what Pixel is doing, identify gaps, and then go after those gaps very systematically, right? So I think that's kind of what the opportunity is here right now, because we're looking for new innovators, right? But building another company of the same kind is probably going to be detrimental to your cause. So I think what I really want to suggest to students is that if they are serious about venture building in this ecosystem or turning over to be an entrepreneur, I think they really need to study what are the gaps in the industry, which gaps can they fill, what are their capabilities, and if they need help with that, they can certainly come and be part of our platform, learn with us, grow with us. We have various different kinds of programs, and hopefully soon enough, as I said, we'll be launching a couple of programs where we're sort of more actively working with universities and students at these universities to support student-led projects, right? Helping them understand where they should be taking their projects and steering them, guiding them in the right direction, maybe even creating opportunities for them to listen to other industry giants and heroes of the industry, so to say, where they could kind of find inspiration and try to find a medium through which they can communicate with them.
One of the interesting aspects here is also about the exit landscape, because at the end of the day, anybody who's investing, needs to also get their money back and exit, right? So in the US, there is a strong enough, ecosystem where you kind of have companies that can either buy you, like Lockheed or Boeing or whoever it is, can actually buy you out, or you could also go into the public markets much earlier than India, where you have to be profitable to even go into the public markets, right? So from that exit landscape point of view, what is your viewpoint as to what could be the exit landscape options for Indian companies?
Oh, what a wonderful question. I come from the world of finance, so my origins are on Wall Street. So here's the fun part, right? And I'm very close to that ecosystem that you talk of. Now in the US also, it's been a little challenging, right, for a lot of companies seeking exits. It's not as fluid and as easy as people perceive it to be from the outside. So for every two or three companies that succeed in finding an exit, there are many others that haven't found that and they've had to pivot or shut down shop or look for other forms of capital, right? So in India, however, you're seeing this. Again, I would believe or assume that people are aware of what's happening in the financial services ecosystem, in fintech, and in general, in trying to access public markets. So I think we're also having this. We have an interesting evolution happening at the same time. You have this very sort of at the very outset, it looks like it's a very siloed sort of environment when you think about innovation and entrepreneurship, and compare it to what is happening in financial markets. But I think there is a simultaneous evolution happening. So I think there will be, in a few years' time, there will be an opportunity for us to replicate what's happening in US, and the ability to kind of go to the public markets sooner will come around. I just think that um, you're right in saying that it's difficult, and I don't know what to say to that at this very instant, how we can change that. But I think if you think about where these companies are and the numbers of companies that we have, so if you think about the number of companies that we have, right, we can easily put together a roadmap where it's the private forms of capital that are really taking that through the Series A, B, C, right? And they may not need to really run to the public markets right away, right? So I think their hurry to get listed right away could be managed for at least the early part of their life, and they're really kind of in that evolutionary phase. But you're right, once they hit Series B, C, and then they're sort of on a comparable format, rather, or a platform, um, with their counterparts elsewhere, they're probably going to want to think about, hey, how do I scale this up? So I think again, there's two things happening there. One is you have to have that intersection of, well, can the public market support some sort of a venture like this, which is super risky, right? And then the risks sometimes don't, in this case particularly so, don't necessarily make sense to a lot of people when they weigh the returns against them. So I think we have to evolve. I think the short answer is we have to continue to evolve and grow, and it's a little bit of a wait and watch period for us on that end. But I think as I said, growth capital and patient capital will come around. I think we just need a little bit of time for people to educate themselves about what's happening in India. And we see that firsthand. So I think there is appetite, there is interest. And when you think about the Lockheeds of the world buying a company in the US, take it from me, they're open to doing it in India, as are other domestic larger corporates. It's just about, you know, them finding a way to mitigate the risk of going in early. But that's going to happen. You're going to see that happen soon. It's just my conviction. If you ask me to back that by research, I may have some data points, but I don't think I'm too far off if I say that it's going to happen in a few years, where you'll find more private capital chasing deals earlier in their life cycle. And I'd say, well within the timeline when you think they could have either gone for a listing or looked for some sort of a stock deal, right? So I think again, we know what is happening with Sparks, so I wouldn't bet too much on those kind of structures. But I think there is enough private capital that can support the early momentum of these companies. And as far as going to the public markets for support is concerned, I think that time will come too. But we're a little bit shy of that.
That's very refreshing, to hear positive notes on all of this and looking at it from a completely positive outlook at the end. So, where are you going to be running programs out of at this point of time? You said that you are primarily based out of Mumbai and Delhi. Is that where the Starburst program for entrepreneurs will be running out of as well?
So Mumbai, we've opened up. So we've opened up a space. It's a 50,000 square feet facility that that I put together, and we launched Starburst out of there. And it's actually not very far from IIT Mumbai. It's close to some of the larger corporates like Reliance, close to the upcoming international airport in Navi Mumbai. So we've opened the offices up there, but we're doing rotational programs, and we're also already sort of in advanced stages to grow our presence in Bangalore. In Chennai, we've been in talks with certain counterparts, and we want to do programs in Delhi. So I personally share between Delhi and Mumbai a lot, and Bangalore's definitely on the cards because of everything that's happening there. And of course, you can't ignore all these various hubs of innovation. So we're truly, I think, region agnostic in that sense. We want to be pan India, to say the least. Starburst India's goal is to be present everywhere, and we really want to enable all these ecosystems in various parts of the country. So we're truly the only kind of. I really take pride in saying we're truly the most independent platform that is out there right now that is trying to weave together everything that's happening across the country, and we want to run programs in all the regions that allow us or need us to be there. So yes, our facility is in Mumbai, but we're scaling up our efforts, and because there's nothing happening physically, we're not doing a lot of physical meetups, but we're present in Delhi, we're present in Mumbai, we're present in Bangalore through our associations, Chennai also. One thing that I will say is super interesting is that we've already in the last few months alone we've received a lot of encouragement and support from various agencies and corporates, global and domestic. So it's really heartwarming to see the kind of response Starburst has received. Also, startups and entrepreneurs are now receiving the message loud and clear that look, there's a platform they can go to be able to connect with the broader ecosystem at large globally. And it's a one-stop shop really. If you think about suppliers, startups, companies, corporates, universities, agencies coming together, it's really a one-stop shop that we've created for all these different ecosystem participants.
It's going to be one of the most exciting things I think happening in India with all of this kind of initiative. What is the roadmap that you have as such? You have a cohort that you want to take up or so on?
Yes, yeah, very much so. So we actually have one form of our accelerator, which is a global accelerator, for which we pick companies out of India and we pit them against our global companies. So we do the sort of the usual screening selection process, and part of that selection process is so interesting that and this is something that brings a lot of people to Starburst, is that we actually have the end target consumers or customers looking at these deals and these companies pitch at that event. So there are a lot of interactions that we create on the bylines of these events through the selection committees and the pitch events that we host, which is I think I would encourage anybody that's listening to kind of really think about that and get in touch with us and our global team. That's a phenomenal platform that you get to kind of showcase your talent, your company in front of a global audience, and also the corporate VCs, other VC firms, investors, sometimes even the private equity investors. So, I mean, it's a really interesting audience pool that you go in front of, and it's a global platform that we run through the Global Accelerator model. So, I think that's a no-brainer. The other program, and that is designed for each country's cohort, is kind of the regional selection committee events that we do. So that's where you kind of interact with more people that are focused on your regions, and then that also includes a mix of other international audience members. So that's the second form. And in terms of the cohort, again, because of the limitations of what we can do physically, we haven't really rolled out a platform, but we are doing it remotely. We continue to build industry vertical focused cohorts, and we're going to, that's going to become the mainstay of our programs in India also. So I don't want to announce it just yet. We're in the works for it, but we're certainly trying to find the right kind of numbers to support that kind of initiative. We're working very actively with universities and corporates to really roll that program out in the most meaningful ways that we can. I think developing a cohort takes a lot of effort, so we're really trying to put everything that's available to us and develop that mechanism to be able to facilitate those kind of transactions and make sure that some good benefit comes out of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Kind of fascinating overall. I think, the ecosystem was definitely missing somebody like you for the last several years, maybe a decade.
I truly believe that. All right. When I co-founded the chapter, and I really convinced my team at Starburst, they're really excited about India, right? So Francois, Juan, Sandro, everybody that's part of the team, and whoever's been doing some great amount of things in various parts of the world already, they're all excited about India globally. our teams and counterparts are very interested in what is happening in India, and we're always constantly finding new ways to connect. So I think it's a really interesting push on our part, and I just hope that the domestic ecosystem continues to respond the way they're responding, and maybe scale that up a little bit, and continue to work with us. So yeah, I'm just happy that we have this opportunity to create something new, something really useful for the broader ecosystem.
Absolutely. And what is it that you think of when you look at 5 to 10 years down the line? Because today we have, let's say, 50 companies, doing trying to kick off and at various stages of their maturity. Where do you see things in, let's say, the next 5 to 10 years?
I think in the next 10 years, I'll take the 10-year trajectory, right? Because I'm definitely more optimistic, but I'm also kind of more systematic in my approach if you think about what's happening now and how I perceive things. So I'd say in the next 10 years, certainly see a very robust, strong supplier network to be present in India, especially in collaboration with their international counterparts, and continue to find ways of innovating and getting to the next milestone and kind of really boosting their own capabilities, if anything, from a supply standpoint. And the other thing that I think is that we're going to go from 50 to 100, 150 companies on average annually across various use cases in the ecosystem, and I think you can attribute a lot of that to efforts like platforms of Starburst, right? Platforms like Starburst. So our efforts, and combined with others, be it a fund, special, or anybody else, do many others that are really trying to pursue these very unique opportunities. I think, and I'm no comes in naming them, right? So I think it's really good that there's this collective mindset that we're operating with, which is, we need to find more deep tech companies in India. So I think in 10 years from now, we will definitely find more things in advanced manufacturing, launchers, propulsion tech. I'm hopeful. I'm a pretty optimistic guy. So given what I've seen here so far, I think there'll be a lot of interesting plays come out, and maybe some ideas that we haven't even thought of right now. And that's going to come from the university or the incubators right now.
Is there a way that people can reach out to you if there's more questions or comments or anything?
Absolutely, anytime. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on Twitter. You can always go to contact us at Starburst.arrow. That's the global contact email. You can always find me at Abhi, which is ABHI at Starburst.arrow. And yeah, just find us on LinkedIn, find us on the website, and we'll take it from there.
Again, Abhi, I think this is kind of fascinating work. Thanks for doing all of this. And then I hope to meet you in person sometime whenever this pandemic is over.
We must, and I can't wait to work more actively with you and your teams. And we're really sort of very happy that there's just so much happening. And I for one, am a huge fan of what you guys do at your end as well. So at Sat Search and your work particularly, Narayan, I think you're such a connector, such an important connector. I truly find comfort in talking to folks like you, because there's a lot of confluence of ideas, a lot of challenging back and forth, and it's really interesting to kind of be part of these conversations. So thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, thanks again for being a part of the show. And I know I hope to record an episode or two with you in person and catching up on all the progress.
Absolutely, would love to anytime, and anytime you find something that we can do for you with Starburst, or you need me for anything in my capacity, happy to do it.